about the end of World War II. Okay, so we're going to see the fall of the Third Reich, and then we're going to also see the end of the war in the Pacific with Japan. Um, Incidentally, this picture right here is a very famous photo taken by Joseph Rosenthal at Iwo Jima. We'll get into talking about this, but this is going to be one of the big battles we're going to talk about today as well. So, okay, here we go. So the Third Reich collapses. So FDR and the other allies promised to punish the Nazis after the war. Okay, so this was something that they had decided that they were going to do. FDR was hoping to destroy the Nazis, by destroying the Nazis, it would end the concentration camps, which obviously it will. So one of the things that the Nazis are using to help defend themselves were called hedgerows. Okay, and you can see these in both of these pictures here. So they're dirt walls that are several feet thick and then just covered in shrubbery. Okay, so they were used to cover their positions, to defend their positions. So you can see that they're not easy to get through. Okay, and you can see sorry, the bell's going to ring again in a minute. But you can see this is where all the hedgerows were. Okay, so there's lots of them all throughout the countryside. So the Battle of the Hedgerows is going to end when the U.S. bombers eventually are going to blow a hole in the German line. So that's going to allow those tanks to go through. And then they're going to liberate, the Allies are going to liberate Paris on August 25th of 1944. And then 3 weeks later, they were right there at the border of Germany. Okay, so they were able to push all the way to Germany. So this is going to lead to what is going to be known as the Battle of the Bulge. And so basically what's going to happen with this is Hitler's just going to throw all of his eggs in one basket. And he is going to launch a massive offensive against the Allies. Okay, so the idea was if he could cut them off from their supplies, then they would have to pull back. There it is. All right, so the Battle of the Bulge started on December 16th, 1944. This caught Americans off guard, the Allies in general off guard. But as Germany pushes west, their line started to bulge. So you can see on this map here where they're moving in. Okay, so they're moving into Belgium, like through Luxembourg and Belgium. But the line started to bulge, and this is right here. The thick line is the bulge. Okay, so they started to bulge outward. And then eventually what's going to happen is the U.S. is going to be able to push through, and then they are going to win. Okay, so January 8th, 1945, Germans start to withdraw, and then at this point, there's nothing to stop the Allies from going into Germany and to getting all the way to Berlin. Okay, so Hitler, realizing that he's lost the war, he kills himself. And so Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz is going to surrender to the United States and the British because he was the next in command of all the guys who are still left alive. We'll talk about a couple more in a minute as well. But he is going to surrender on May 7th, 1945, and then the next day is going to be considered VE Day. Okay, so this is Victory in Europe Day. All right, and you can see that depicted in that picture on the bottom there. Okay, so Japan. So FDR died in April of 1945, so right before the surrender of Germany. And so his vice president, who was Harry S. Truman, incidentally the only president from Missouri, if anybody cares, he's going to become president. So November 24th, 1944, this is before Truman was president, U.S. bombs fell on Tokyo, but they missed their targets. So the U.S. decided that they're going to invade Iwo Jima. I'm going to show you some maps here in a second. Iwo Jima, much closer to Japan, and then they can use it as a place where they can land planes, and planes can take off. So on February 19th, 1945, 60,000 Marines landed on the island of Iwo Jima. This battle is going to last 5 weeks, so it was 36 days. In this battle, 6,800 Americans died and 21,000 Japanese died. And a lot of the Japanese, so what they would do is they would hunker down. They made like tunnels all throughout. There's mountains and stuff on this island. They made tunnels all throughout, and they basically fought from those tunnels. And then once they realized that they were surrounded, they were going to lose, what they would do is they would take a grenade, pull the pin, and put it against their chest and commit suicide. Because to lose was considered, very dishonorable. Okay. And so only 200 Japanese soldiers actually survived the battle. Okay, so but most of them, oh, well, a lot of them, not most of them, a lot of them committed suicide before the Americans could get to them. So one of the other things that the U.S. is going to start to do is they're going to start to use napalm. We're going to see this more in the Vietnam War, especially, but other wars we're going to see it during the Cold War. So a napalm, it's a jellied gasoline. Okay, so they're going to start to use this in the Pacific, but the thing is, it's super hard to control. Okay, so once it hits, like you can see that picture there, it just like spreads out like crazy. So when it explodes, it explodes outward, and it just like kills all the vegetation, anything within it, just catches fire like crazy. So they're going to have a firebombing in Tokyo that's going to kill over 80,000 people, more than 250,000 buildings. And the thing is the napalm was really because it was, you can't hardly control it. It killed a lot of civilians. So a lot of people were very against the use of napalm, although this is going to get used extensively in the Vietnam War in particular. Okay, so this right here is a map kind of showing the island hopping that we talked about throughout the Pacific theater. Okay, so you can see the different hopping. So this right here is Iwo Jima. So you can see it's much closer. They were down, the U.S. was down in here before this. Okay, so they're able to launch planes and land planes here. And then eventually we're going to go to Okinawa. We'll talk about this in the next slide. Okinawa is right here. Okay, so it's really close to Japan. Okay, it's like 350 miles away. Okay, this right here is the photo. This is like the official photo that Rosenthal took, and this is on the top of Mount Suribachi, which is like the big mountain on the island. And this was actually raised 5 days into the battle. So the battle lasted 36 days. So it goes to show you how long the Japanese were able to hold out because they had such an extensive tunnel system all throughout the island. Okay, so the U.S. invaded Okinawa, like I said, April 1st, 1945. So not long after they won. So I think it was like March 26th. They won in Iwo Jima. The battle ended. And then April 1st is when they're going to invade Okinawa. So once again, island hopping. So it's way close to Japan, okay, which is really good. So even though the U.S. was able to gain this area, Japan still refuses to surrender unconditionally. So their biggest thing was they wanted to keep their emperor in power, which is not going to happen. Spoiler alert. But Americans wanted him out. Truman did not want to go against public opinion because everybody was on his side at this point. He didn't want to go against what everybody wanted. And so this is going to lead to, well, the Manhattan Project was going on for a while, but this is going to lead to the use of the Manhattan Project. So the Manhattan Project was a program to build an atomic bomb. Okay, so July 6, 1945 was the first atomic bomb that was detonated near Alamogordo, New Mexico. And we're going to officially use it in August of 1945, okay, against the Japanese. So the Allies warned Japan to surrender or they'd be faced with quote-unquote utter destruction. And they still refused. So what happened August 6, 1945 in Hiroshima? So what the U.S. did was they dropped warnings, like they flew over and they dropped like papers warning people like, hey, get out of Hiroshima because we're going to bomb it. We're going to drop, like, it's going to be bad. But the Japanese government told them to ignore that, okay? So a lot of people are going to die. So the U.S. is going to drop Little Boy. This is Little Boy right here. The plane was called the Enola Gay. It was named after the pilot's mother. But they're going to drop Little Boy on Hiroshima. Okay, so this is August 6th. So this is the first detonation of an atomic bomb on enemy soil. Tens of thousands of people died instantly, and even more died later of radiation poisoning and other sicknesses as a result of it. August 9th, they still refuse to surrender. August 9th, Soviet Union says we're going to declare war on Japan now too because the war in Europe is over. Same day, we drop Fat Man. These are both obviously recreations. They're not the actual bombs. This is Fat Man, and they dropped that on Nagasaki, another industrial area. So between 35 to 74,000 people died. And then August 15th, the Japanese finally surrendered unconditionally. So They surrendered on the USS Missouri, so it's a ship that's um, that's this, and then the war ends, and that's it. So the big debate is, should Truman have dropped those bombs? Okay, the idea was that it saved countless American lives because the Japanese were not going to give up. They were going to fight to the very last, unless something like this were to happen. Was the idea. So, all right. So building a new world. So after the war's over, we gotta recover from it. So FDR wanted a new international political organization in order to prevent future wars. So something that Woodrow Wilson wanted after World War One, FDR wants this as well. So in 1944, delegates from 39 countries are all going to get together. They're going to get together in San Francisco, and they're going to discuss what eventually would become the United Nations. So they're going to scrap the League of Nations and create a new organization. So April 25th, 1945, these representatives met in San Francisco and they created a charter, which is just a constitution for the UN. Okay, so they decided to have a general assembly, so where every country gets one vote. Okay, it doesn't matter what country you are, every country who is a part of the United Nations gets a vote. Today, FYI, there's 193 countries in the United Nations. So every member gets a vote, and then there's 5 countries, the 5 founding members, basically: Britain, France, China, the Soviet Union, and the U.S. Soviet Union is now Russia. Would be permanent members of the Security Council, so they can veto anything the General Assembly um, passes. Okay, so today this is what the UN looks like. This is the entrance to it. That's their logo. This is the Secretary General. He's basically the guy who's the head of the UN. That's Antonio Guterres. He's Portuguese. And then this is the UN building right here. And you can see this is in New York City. Okay. So this is all of this right here is United Nations. This tall building and then this building right here. Okay. That's all United Nations. Okay. So the Allies created an International Military Tribunal, or an IMT, in August of 1945 to try the war crimes of the Japanese and the Germans. And so they tried German leaders of war crimes at the Nuremberg trials, which is in Nuremberg, Germany. In this, 24 individuals were indicted. Hitler and his top aides, so Heinrich Himmler and Joseph Goebbels, so there's Himmler and there's Goebbels, they committed suicide before the trials. And there's a few that did that as well. But eventually, also 6 Nazi organizations were indicted. Probably the most significant was the Gestapo, which was Hitler's secret police. And then there were, I don't remember how many that were actually prosecuted. I want to say it was like 17 were actually prosecuted, and some were hanged for war crimes. And then Tokyo war crimes trials. So basically, their top leaders, except the emperor. The emperor was never indicted. They were tried. 25 of them were prosecuted. Okay, so the point is they're going to punish the people for the war, but also Japan itself was really punished. And we'll talk about the way Germany was kind of split up in the next unit, but Japan is going to lose things like they weren't allowed to have a military anymore. They still don't have a military to this day. They have a national guard. They're not allowed to leave their borders without specific permission from the United Nations, even today. So in a lot of ways, we've also kind of been their military. We've been there to defend them if something happens. But that's really all they're allowed to do. So even to this day, they don't have an army. Okay. This video here is about the United Nations. This is your processor, so just answer the questions as this goes.
The United Nations is an organization that, depending on your perspective, is either a pointless waste of money, the harbinger of the Antichrist in the New World Order, or an organization for the peace and stability of the modern world. But what exactly is the UN? After World War I, President Woodrow Wilson tried to set up an organization called the League of Nations. It was designed to be an organization to stop international conflict before it starts, and when it did occur, to end it swiftly. However, this didn't work out so well, as Wilson underestimated the diplomats and heads of state of Europe, and failed to consult the U.S. Senate, who who would be the ones ultimately voting for it. The League would be created, but without the United States joining it. It would be seen as a failure after it failed to prevent the Second World War. Despite the League failing, the idea of an international body that strove for peace among nations was still desired by many countries, especially after World War II. The United Nations originated out of a declaration drafted by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Prime Minister Winston Churchill. The members of the United Nations were to pledges itself to employ its full resources, military or economic, against those members of the Tripartite Pact and its adherents, with which such government is at war. It began its life as a military alliance, and 26 nations signed this initial declaration. As World War II drew to a close, nations around the world scrambled to join the United Nations, out of fear that they would be left out of the biggest military alliance in world history. In April of 1945, the members of this alliance met in San Francisco to draft a charter for a post-war organization of the same name. The United Nations of today would officially come into existence on October 24, 1945, with 51 members. As decolonization occurred over the course of the 20th century, more and more nations would be admitted. There are 6 main bodies that make up the United Nations. The base of the UN is the General Assembly. Whenever you hear about some random country saying something crazy, it usually comes out of this body. This body is similar to the lower house of Congress in that it creates budgets and approves new members to join. They are also responsible to elect the administrative head of the United Nations, the Secretariat. The Secretariat is headed by the UN Secretary General, who is elected to 5-year terms. Their job is to administer the various bodies of the UN and serve as the public face of the organization. The true core of power for the United Nations lies in the Security Council, which is a body of 15 nations that are responsible for maintaining peace and security. The Council has 5 permanent members, which originally contained the United States, the United Kingdom, France, the Soviet Union, and the Republic of China. The Republic of China was replaced by the People's Republic of China in 1971, and the Russian Federation succeeded to the Soviet Union's seat in 1992. The other 10 members of the Security Council are elected by the General Assembly for 2-year terms, with 5 new members being elected each year. Countries that are terming out are not eligible for immediate re-election. These 15 members are divided between 5 groups: the African, the Asian Pacific, the Eastern European, the Latin American and Caribbean, and the Western European and Others group. The 5 permanent members of the Security Council are divided amongst these groups. The US, the UK, and France are included in the Western European and Others group, leaving 2 rotating seats. Russia occupies one of the Eastern European seats, leaving 1 rotating, and the People's Republic of China occupies one of the 3 Asia-Pacific seats. The Security Council has its own president, which rotates between members on a month-by-month basis, each member getting to hold the presidency once every 15 months. The Council votes on potential military actions and is the only body of the UN that has the ability to pass binding resolutions. It is also one of the most highly criticized organs of the UN. Though all 15 members of this council have a vote, the 5 permanent members each have a veto and therefore can prevent any action made by the committee. This is why there are so few major military operations by the United Nations, and none of these operations are made directly against any permanent members. This deadlock became inevitable after the Korean War, when the Soviet Union protested the actions of the Security Council by not showing up to vote. This led to the only UN action against a permanent member when they approved a US-led invasion of Korea to stop the Soviet-backed North against the South. Since then, the Soviet Union, followed by Russia, never abstained from using their veto. Then there is the International Court of Justice, which arbitrates disputes between different nations, as well as hold international trials against dictators and human rights abusers. The court has 15 judges elected for 9-year terms, with the same regional distribution as the UN Security Council. There is also the UN Economic and Social Council, which attempts to promote and regulate cooperation between member states in areas of social and economic issues. It has 54 members that are elected by the General Assembly to 3-year terms. The last major body of the UN is the Trusteeship Council. This body was originally designed to manage the former League of Nations mandates. This body has been inactive since the last mandate, Palau, gained independence in 1994. So there you have it, 6 bodies. 2 legislative, 1 administrative, 1 judicial, 1 policy, and 1 defunct, all part of the United Nations. If you would like to see more content, then you can go ahead and check out the videos I've curated over here. If you would like to know when new videos come out, then you should go ahead.
Alright, so there's that. I hope you guys all have a good day, and don't forget to make sure you submit that on Classroom. Have a good one.